My stepfather demanded that I pay rent for my own house, but he didn't know that the house has been mine for a long time. Hey, I'm Lily, 26, and let me set the stage for you. I live in the ultimate suburban cliché. Think white picket fences, flawless lawns, and neighbors who compete over who has the best Christmas lights. It's the kind of place where everyone smiles at you while secretly hoping your Amazon package gets stolen so they can gossip about it. My house might look like it belongs on a Hallmark card, but inside, it's a dumpster fire. I share this suburban prison with my mom, Carol, and her husband, Gerald. Gerald is one of those guys who thinks he's always the smartest person in the room, even when he's arguing with the toaster. His personality? A mix of unnecessary arrogance and the charm of a car alarm that won't shut off. The man has two moods, condescending or silent. And trust me, I've prayed for the latter more times than I can count. So one night, I dragged myself home after another day of dealing with my soul-sucking job. I'm halfway through a mental debate about whether I want to eat ramen or just collapse when Gerald pounces. He's in the kitchen, arms crossed, wearing this smug grin like he's about to reveal the secret to life. Spoiler, he isn't. "Lily," he starts, in his classic, "I'm the boss of you tone. It's time you start pulling your weight around here. Rent doesn't pay itself." I blink, wondering if I accidentally walked into the wrong house. "What?" "You heard me," he continues, chest puffed out like a proud rooster. $700 a month, starting next month. $700? For this house? The same house where I've been fixing clogged sinks and cleaning up after his dog? It felt like a bad sitcom, except no one was laughing. I try to keep a straight face. "You want me to pay you rent to live in my house?" He raises an eyebrow, clearly not catching the irony. "It's called responsibility, Lily. You should try it sometime." Oh, the audacity! Here's the plot twist Gerald doesn't know. This house is legally mine. Yep, my dad left it to me when he passed, but I let my mom and Gerald live here because, well, I'm a decent human being. Gerald has been strutting around like a king in a castle that he doesn't even own. But instead of dropping that truth bomb right there, I just smiled sweetly. "Sure, Gerald, I'll think about it." The look of triumph on his face was almost too much to handle. He had no idea that he was about to learn the most brutal life lesson of all. Don't try to hustle the person who actually owns the house you live in. Here's the part Gerald has no clue about. This house, my house, is mine, as in legally, officially mine. 5 years ago, when my dad passed, he left it to me. Surprise, surprise, the king of nothing has been strutting around like he's some big shot landlord when, in reality, he's more like a squatter with delusions of grandeur. My mom, oh, she knows. She handled the paperwork back then because I was too busy trying to process, losing my actual father. Her grand idea? Don't tell Gerald. "It'll keep the peace," she said, like living with a man who organizes his sock drawer more passionately than he cares about human relationships was ever peaceful. For a while, I played along, not because I agreed with her, but because I had bigger things to worry about, like finishing school and paying off student loans that could buy a small island. But Gerald's rent demand? That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Or in this case, the straw that made me realize I've been enabling this human-sized ego trip for way too long. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I started gathering receipts. Not the text your best friend and vent kind, but actual legal receipts. Deeds, titles, everything with my name on it. Every piece of paper proving that this house belongs to me. I even double-checked with a lawyer because, hey, if I'm going to drop a bomb, I want it to be nuclear. I tucked all the documents into a safe. Yes, an actual safe, because I don't trust Gerald not to snoop through my stuff. Let me tell you, there's something incredibly satisfying about looking at a folder of evidence that says, "This is mine, you're just visiting." What's hilarious is that Gerald still thinks he's in charge. Every time he walks around like some budget version of a real estate mogul, I have to bite my tongue not to laugh. He's been charging me rent in a house that's been mine for years. It's almost impressive, like watching someone confidently fail a test they wrote themselves. My mom keeps telling me to let it go, to not rock the boat. But you know what? I'm not just rocking this boat, I'm flipping it over. Gerald wants to play landlord? Fine. Let's see how he feels when he realizes the person he's trying to hustle is the actual owner of the property. For now, I'm biding my time, letting him dig his own hole. But when the time comes, oh, he's going to learn that messing with me was the worst mistake he's ever made. Rent, Gerald? Sure. How about you start paying me? A week later, Gerald strutted into the kitchen like he'd just won an award for most annoying human alive. In his hand was an actual printed-out lease agreement, complete with a clip art border and Comic Sans font. Because, of course, Gerald. He slammed it onto the table with the flair of someone revealing a winning lottery ticket. "Sign this or start packing," he barked, like a discount sheriff in a low-budget western. I stared at him, trying not to burst out laughing. "Packing? And where exactly do you suggest I go, Gerald? The front yard? Maybe I'll pitch a tent by the mailbox and charge rent to the mailman." He crossed his arms, clearly not amused by my sarcasm. "You're an adult. Figure it out." "Oh, so we're playing the big man card now?" Cute. Gerald had been cruising for a bruising for weeks, and this was his masterpiece, demanding rent from me in a house I already owned. But instead of flipping the table like some soap opera diva, I grabbed a pen and smiled sweetly. "Fine," I said, signing the ridiculous piece of paper while mentally planning his downfall. Gerald didn't just want money, he wanted control. He wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small. And let me tell you, I've never been the type to play nice when someone tries to step on me. "Good," he said, snatching the paper back like it was the Magna Carta. "Rent's due on the 1st. I watched him leave the kitchen with the swagger of someone who thinks they've just scored a major victory. Bless his delusional little heart. Gerald had no idea that he was signing himself up for a reality check so brutal it would make reality TV look tame. Later that night, I sat down with a cup of tea, because I'm classy like that, and reviewed my next steps. Step 1, make sure all my legal ducks were in a row. Step 2, let Gerald dig his own grave a little deeper. Step 3, deliver the smackdown of the century. The best part? Watching Gerald strut around the house for the next few days, acting like he was some kind of financial genius. Every time he passed me, he'd throw in little digs. "Make sure you keep your space clean. This isn't a free ride, you know." Or my personal favorite, "It's good you're finally learning some responsibility." Responsibility? Oh, Gerald, if only you knew. I wasn't just learning responsibility, I was learning how to dismantle your entire power trip, one smug comment at a time. By the time I was done, Gerald would wish he'd stayed in his lane. But for now, I let him have his moment, knowing the clock was ticking on his reign of nonsense. Let me tell you, if snooping were an Olympic sport, I'd be on the podium with a gold medal right now. Gerald thinks he's some financial wizard, but a little digging proved otherwise. Turns out, our wannabe landlord isn't exactly rolling in dough. Nope, he's more like drowning in it. The bad kind. Overdue credit card bills, a failed business that screamed poor life choices, and, oh yeah, some sketchy loans he decided to take out under my mom's name. Classy, right? I started a folder because every good takedown needs receipts, both literal and metaphorical. Every late payment, every shady transaction, every cringeworthy detail of his financial disaster, it all went in there. And let me tell you, compiling that mess was oddly satisfying. It's like Gerald handed me a roadmap to his downfall, complete with neon signs that read, "Ruined reputation, next exit." Meanwhile, I played along like the perfect little tenant. When the first rent payment rolled around, I handed over $700 in cash. Yes, cash. Why? Because I made sure to film the entire thing. Picture this. Gerald, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, holding my money as if he'd just solved world hunger. It was almost too good to be true. "Here you go, Gerald," I said, my voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Rent, just like you wanted." His grin widened. "Good. Glad to see you're finally taking responsibility." Responsibility? Oh, the irony. This man wouldn't know responsibility if it hit him with a sledgehammer. But I just smiled, all while mentally filing that video under Exhibit A for the day I'd inevitably need it. And you know what fueled me even more? The sheer audacity of that grin. The way he strutted off with my money, as if he were some kind of real estate tycoon, and not just a guy living rent-free in my house. It was like watching a chicken trying to convince everyone it's an eagle. Cute, but painfully misguided. Over the next few days, Gerald kept throwing little jabs. "Make sure you don't forget next month's payment," he'd say, like he wasn't the one borrowing against my mom's credit to fund his bar tabs. Every comment, every smug look, it was all fuel for the fire. He thought he had me under his thumb, but in reality, I was just letting him tighten the noose. I mean, it's almost sad when you think about it. Almost. But then I remember that Gerald tried to charge me rent for my own house, and suddenly, all that sympathy evaporates. The stage was set, the receipts were piling up, and Gerald was blissfully unaware that his house of cards was about to come crashing down. Gerald's nitpicking hit a whole new level of petty recently, and let me tell you, I didn't think that was possible. It started small. Snarky comments about how I loaded the dishwasher or the mess I made while cooking, which, for the record, was just a spoon left in the sink. But then it escalated. He had the nerve to critique how I parked my car in the driveway. Apparently, my angle was off. Who even notices that? But the real kicker came one day when I walked in, ready to collapse after a long day, and found my bedroom door locked. I didn't even know we had a key for it. But there it was, Gerald's masterpiece of pettiness. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice teetering between confusion and rage. "You violated the lease," Gerald declared, standing there with his arms crossed like he'd just delivered a courtroom verdict. "Your shoes were in the hallway." "Are you kidding me?" I shot back, my eyebrow practically hitting the ceiling. He smirked. "Rules are rules, Lily. Maybe next time you'll think twice before leaving a mess in common areas." It was at that moment I knew I wasn't just dealing with a control freak. Gerald was the human embodiment of a middle school hall monitor, drunk on power. And I was done. The next day, I called a little family meeting in the living room. My mom sat on the couch, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, while Gerald took his spot in the recliner, all smug and self-satisfied. Perfect. I placed a thick folder on the coffee table and slid it toward them. "What's this?" Gerald sneered, clearly annoyed that I'd interrupted his day of making everyone miserable. I crossed my arms, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "Proof that I own this house," I said, my voice calm but laced with pure, unfiltered satisfaction. Gerald's smirk disappeared faster than a tray of snacks at a Super Bowl party. He hesitated before opening the folder, his fingers fumbling like he already knew the contents weren't going to be in his favor. My mom, meanwhile, just stared at the wall, probably wishing she could dissolve into it. As Gerald flipped through the documents, his face went from smug pink to ghostly white. "What is this?" he finally muttered, his voice shaking just enough to make my day. "It's the deed to the house," I replied. "In my name. So technically, Gerald, you're the one living here rent-free. And if I wanted to, I could evict you." The silence was deafening. My mom let out a small, nervous cough. But Gerald, he just sat there, holding those papers like they were a bad report card he didn't want to show his parents. Checkmate. The very next morning, I decided to escalate things in a way Gerald would never see coming. I contacted a lawyer, a real no-nonsense type who had "don't mess with me" energy written all over her LinkedIn profile. I explained the situation, and she was on board faster than Gerald can nitpick a misplaced sock. Together, we drafted a formal letter to Mr. I Own the Place. It wasn't an eviction notice, yet. It was more like a legal slap on the wrist. A heads up that if he didn't knock it off, I'd happily take things to the next level. Oh, and because I'm all about those details, we added a clause about back payments for the rent I'd so generously handed over under his fake landlord act. Fair is fair, right? The letter was delivered the following afternoon, and let me tell you, the reaction was worth every penny I spent on that lawyer. Gerald came stomping into the kitchen like a bull who'd just seen red, or in this case, legal jargon. He slapped the letter onto the counter and glared at me with the intensity of a reality TV contestant mid-breakdown. "What the hell is this?" he barked, his face turning the shade of an overripe tomato. "Oh, you got my letter," I said, casually sipping my coffee like we were discussing the weather. "Great. That's just a friendly little reminder that your reign of nonsense has an expiration date." He lost it. "Ungrateful brat. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me? With lawyers and threats?" I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Everything you've done for the family? Gerald, you lock my bedroom door over a pair of shoes and make me pay rent in my own house. You'll forgive me if I don't nominate you for Stepfather of the Year." He started pacing the kitchen like a villain in a low-budget crime drama, muttering about family loyalty and how I was tearing us apart. Honestly, it was such a performance, I half expected him to ask for an intermission and a standing ovation. Meanwhile, I just stood there, arms crossed, enjoying the show. "You don't scare me," he yelled, trying to save face. "You think a piece of paper changes anything?" I tilted my head, giving him my best bless your heart smile. "It's not about scaring you, Gerald. It's about reminding you that I've got all the cards now. And trust me, this deck is stacked." For the first time in forever, I felt like I had control. No more walking on eggshells, no more bending over backward to avoid his tantrums. Gerald could rant and rave all he wanted, but the power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. Game on, Gerald. Gerald pulling the classic turn the mom against her own kid move? Predictable. He stormed into the living room one night, all red-faced and dramatic, and threw out his big accusation. "Lily's tearing this family apart." He said it like he was on a soap opera, pausing for dramatic effect. I half expected my mom to gasp and faint into a chaise lounge, but to my surprise, and probably his too, Mom didn't bite. She just looked at him, sighed, and said, "Gerald, maybe the problem isn't Lily." Oh my God, I had to keep myself from clapping right then and there. My mom finally grew a backbone. She even admitted later, when Gerald wasn't around, that she was sick of his constant bullying and hinted she might be thinking about leaving him. I almost hugged her, but we're not exactly a hug-it-out kind of family. Meanwhile, Gerald started disappearing more often. He claimed he was out with friends, but let's be real. This was Gerald. His friends were probably a warm beer and a bowl of peanuts at the dive bar down the street. And honestly, good riddance. Every time the front door slammed behind him, it felt like the house exhaled a little sigh of relief. Without Gerald stomping around, nitpicking everything from how I folded the laundry to the way I chopped onions, yes, that was a real argument, life got a whole lot better. I could cook dinner without him leaning over my shoulder, making his passive-aggressive little comments about how much salt I was using, like he's some kind of Michelin-starred chef. Spoiler, Gerald once burned microwave popcorn, so his culinary expertise is, let's say, limited. The silence was glorious. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts. Or, better yet, my favorite shows. I binge-watched Netflix without Gerald chiming in with his unasked-for critiques. "Why do they always whisper in these shows?" he'd grumble. "Is this supposed to be art?" Now I could turn up the volume as loud as I wanted and immerse myself in crime dramas without his running commentary. I even started reclaiming the kitchen, whipping up meals that didn't involve Gerald's signature dish, leftovers. Cooking became fun again, not a battleground. I'd put on some music, dance around the stove, and enjoy the fact that I didn't have to listen to him ask if I'd cleaned as I went every 5 minutes. For the first time in forever, the house felt like a home, a quiet, peaceful home. Gerald could stay out with friends as long as he wanted. Maybe he'd even stay out permanently. Fingers crossed. One sunny morning, Gerald waddled into the kitchen, his usual aura of smugness noticeably deflated. With a deep theatrical sigh, he announced, "I'm moving out." Like that was supposed to shock me or something. Apparently, he'd found an apartment better suited to his needs. Oh, please. Translation? He realized he'd lost the war and was retreating like a sore loser. I didn't even try to hide my grin. "Need help with the rent deposit?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter, my voice dripping with more sarcasm than syrup on pancakes. "Don't push your luck," he muttered, glaring at me as he stomped off. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. Watching Gerald pack his junk was oddly therapeutic. He shoved clothes, old DVDs, and random knickknacks into boxes with all the grace of a raccoon digging through a dumpster. Every now and then, I'd walk by and innocently ask if he needed help. Of course, I didn't mean it. I just wanted to see him squirm. He refused every time, muttering things under his breath that I couldn't hear but didn't care to either. As he dragged the last box to the front door, I stood there, arms crossed, enjoying every second of his slow-motion exit. He paused, probably waiting for some dramatic goodbye speech. Instead, I just raised an eyebrow and said, "Don't forget to forward your mail." He slammed the door behind him with the kind of flair only Gerald could manage, and just like that, it was over. The house was mine again, completely mine. No more passive-aggressive notes about how I left the light on, no more lectures on responsibility from a man who couldn't manage his own finances. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. My mom and I started rebuilding our relationship, step by step. It wasn't perfect. Years of Gerald's nonsense had left its scars. But we were trying. Without him around, she seemed lighter, freer. She started laughing more, and for the first time in ages, our home felt like, well, a home. As for Gerald, let's just say I haven't heard a peep from him since he slammed that door. Maybe he's sulking in his better-suited apartment, trying to con his new neighbors into paying his utility bills. Whatever he's up to, it's blissfully far away from me. Now on quiet evenings, I like to sit on the porch with a glass of wine in hand, soaking up the peace Gerald's absence has gifted me. Every so often, I'll raise my glass in his honor. "Cheers, Gerald," I'll say to the empty air. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." And you know what? Life has never been sweeter.